The night after we buried my father, my older brother stood in the doorway holding my suitcase, while my 6-year-old son cried beside me. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You are Dad's biggest disappointment. You don't belong in this house anymore." I thought losing my parents would be the worst pain of my life. I was wrong, because 3 weeks later, my brother opened Dad's final letter, and suddenly the man who threw us out looked like he wanted to disappear from his own life. Stick with me, because everything people believed about my family was a lie. My name is Maren Whitlock, and for most of my life, I felt invisible inside my own home. My father, Grant Whitlock, owned a successful construction company in Ohio. Everyone admired my older brother, Declan. He was confident, smart, and treated like the perfect son. Dad praised him constantly in front of everyone. But me? I was always treated like the mistake nobody wanted to talk about. Things became even worse after I became a single mother at 23. From that moment on, my father looked at me like I had ruined the family name. At every family dinner, Declan sat proudly beside Dad while I stayed quiet at the other end of the table. Even my little boy, Elliot, noticed it. One Christmas night, he softly whispered, "Grandpa likes Uncle Declan more." That broke my heart more than I can explain. Still, when my parents died in a terrible car accident during a winter storm, I believed maybe tragedy would finally bring the family closer together. Instead, it destroyed what little love we had left. The day after the funeral, Declan called me into Dad's office. His wife, Vanessa, stood silently beside him while he opened a folder filled with estate papers. "The company is mine," he said coldly. "The house, too." I stared at him in confusion. "What does that have to do with me?" He looked directly at me. "It means you need to leave." Upstairs, Elliot packed his toys while downstairs my brother erased us from the family completely. That night, we slept inside my old car in a grocery store parking lot because every motel nearby was full from a hockey tournament. While Elliot slept against my shoulder under a thin blanket, I cried quietly in the driver's seat. But I didn't know my father had left behind one final secret. A sealed letter meant only for Declan. And when he finally opened it, everything began to fall apart. 3 weeks after throwing Maren and Elliot out of the house, Declan Whitlock could barely sleep. Every room inside the large family home felt colder now. The silence bothered him more every day. Sometimes he thought he could still hear Elliot crying near the front door the night they left. One evening, Declan went into his father's private office to search for company documents. Business problems had started piling up after Grant Whitlock's death, and Declan felt pressure from everyone around him. While checking inside the office safe, he noticed a sealed envelope hidden beneath old files. 6 words were written across the front. "For Declan only, after my death." Declan immediately believed it was about the construction company. Maybe final business instructions. Maybe advice about leadership. But the moment he opened the letter, his entire world changed. The first lines made his stomach tighten. Grant confessed that Maren was never the disappointment of the family. She was actually the reason the family survived years earlier. Declan sat frozen in the chair as he continued reading. Nearly 10 years before, the construction company had almost collapsed during a major lawsuit. The family was drowning in debt, and Declan never even knew how serious things had become. According to the letter, Maren secretly gave up her college savings to help save the company. She worked multiple jobs for years and quietly helped pay family bills while everyone continued treating Declan like the successful child. Grant admitted something even more painful. He hid the truth because his pride could not handle the idea that his perfect son needed rescuing by his younger daughter. Declan's hands started shaking. Then he reached the final pages. Hidden ownership documents proved Maren legally owned part of Whitlock Construction. Their father had secretly placed shares under her name years ago, but never told anyone. Declan reread the letter 3 times in complete silence. Everything he believed about his father suddenly felt poisoned. All those years, he thought Maren was weak, irresponsible, a burden to the family. But none of it was true. His father had spent years manipulating both of them. That night, Declan walked through the empty house, unable to breathe properly. Then another memory hit him hard. Marin standing silently beside her suitcase. Elliot holding his small backpack. Snow falling outside while he forced them to leave. For the first time in his life, Declan realized something horrifying. The person who destroyed his family was not Marin. It was the man both of them spent their whole lives trying to please. After reading his father's letter, Declan Whitlock stopped feeling like himself. He barely slept anymore. Some nights he sat alone in the dark living room until sunrise, staring at the same pages over and over again. The words haunted him. Every childhood memory suddenly looked different now. He remembered family dinners where his father praised him while Marin stayed quiet at the table. He remembered moments when Marin tried helping at the company, only for Grant to criticize her in front of everyone. Back then, Declan never questioned it. He simply accepted the version of his sister his father created. Now he could not stop thinking about it. At work, things became worse. Employees noticed he was distracted. Meetings went badly because he could not focus for more than a few minutes. Meanwhile, Vanessa noticed the change immediately. At first, she still defended her husband for throwing Marin out of the house. "We thought your father wanted that," she told him one night. But everything changed after she secretly read the letter herself. Declan came home one evening and found her sitting silently at the kitchen table holding the papers. Her face looked pale. "How could your father lie like this for years?" she asked quietly. Declan had no answer, because deep down, he had started asking himself something even worse. Why did he never question the cruelty? Days later, Vanessa uncovered another painful truth while organizing old financial files inside the office. During Grant's wife's cancer treatments years earlier, many hospital bills had been paid from a private account connected to Marin. Vanessa checked the dates twice because she thought it had to be a mistake. But it was true. While Declan traveled for work and focused on building his career, Marin quietly helped keep their mother alive without asking for praise or attention. And nobody ever thanked her. The more Vanessa learned, the colder she became toward her husband. She realized something deeply disturbing. Declan never truly hated his sister. He simply obeyed the role his father designed for him since childhood. The successful son, the future leader, the important child. And Marin had been sacrificed to protect that image. One night, Vanessa finally looked at him with tears in her eyes and asked, "Did you ever stop and ask yourself if your sister deserved kindness?" Declan could not speak, because for the first time in his life, he saw himself clearly. Not as the successful businessman everyone admired, but as a man who watched someone suffer for years and never once tried to stop it. And that realization hurt more than the letter ever could. While Declan Whitlock struggled with guilt and sleepless nights, Marin focused on something much simpler: survival. She stopped waiting for apologies that might never come. Every morning, she woke up early, got Elliot ready for school, and pushed herself through another difficult day. Money was tight, but she refused to fall apart. After weeks of searching, Marin finally found work at a small property office on the edge of town. The pay was not amazing, but it was enough to keep food on the table and rent paid. That was where she met Ruth. Ruth was an older woman with kind eyes and a sharp sense of humor. She noticed immediately that Marin looked emotionally exhausted. "You look like someone carrying the whole world alone," Ruth told her one afternoon. For some reason, those words almost made Marin cry. A few days later, Ruth helped her find a tiny apartment above a local bakery. The rent was cheap, the walls were old, and the kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people. But to Marin, it felt peaceful. For the first time in years, she lived somewhere without judgment hanging over her every second. There were no cold stares at dinner. No constant comparisons to Declan. No painful silence whenever she entered a room. And slowly, Elliot changed too. He laughed more often now. He slept peacefully through the night. Sometimes he even danced around the apartment while the smell of fresh bread drifted upstairs from the bakery below. One evening while helping him with homework, Marin realized something painful but freeing. Her son seemed happier without the Whitlock family around him. That truth hurt, but it also healed something inside her. Then one afternoon, a large envelope arrived from a law office connected to her father's estate. Marin almost ignored it at first. But when she opened the documents, her entire body froze. Inside were ownership records connected to Whitlock Construction. Legal documents clearly showed that she owned 40% of the company. 40%. She reread the papers several times in complete disbelief. The same brother who threw her out of the family home had no idea she legally held power over the company he believed belonged entirely to him. For years, Maren felt small inside her own family. Weak. Unwanted. Replaceable. But sitting alone at her tiny kitchen table, holding those papers in shaking hands, something inside her finally changed. For the first time in her life, Maren Whitlock no longer felt powerless. And she made one quiet decision. She would not warn Declan about what was coming next. Weeks passed before Declan finally gathered the courage to contact Maren. By then, the silence between them felt heavy and permanent. He sat alone in his office staring at her phone number for nearly 10 minutes before finally calling. When Maren answered, her voice sounded calm but distant. "What do you want, Declan?" For a moment, he could not speak. All the guilt he carried suddenly felt too large to explain. "I wanted to talk," he said quietly. There was a long silence on the other side. Then Maren replied, "Talk about what?" Declan rubbed his forehead nervously. "About everything. About Dad. About what happened after the funeral." He tried to explain himself carefully. "I thought Dad wanted." "You never needed proof to treat me badly," Maren interrupted. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. Declan closed his eyes, unable to respond. Because deep down, he knew she was right. Their father may have created the favoritism, but Declan chose to continue it for years without questioning it once. The call ended shortly after that. Maren did not yell. She did not cry. That somehow made it hurt even more. A few days later, the situation inside Whitlock Construction became far worse. Declan received official notice from company lawyers informing him that the ownership structure could not legally continue without Maren's approval. Her 40% ownership changed everything. Major business decisions now required her involvement. Declan felt panic rising inside him as emergency meetings filled his schedule. Soon, rumors spread throughout the company. Senior employees began asking dangerous questions. Why would Grant Whitlock hide ownership records from everyone? Why was Maren erased from the company's story completely? Business partners slowly started losing confidence in Whitlock Construction. Some delayed investments. Others quietly stepped away from future projects. The Whitlock family name, once respected across Ohio, suddenly looked unstable. Meanwhile, the tension inside Declan's marriage became impossible to ignore. Vanessa barely spoke to him unless necessary. The more truth she uncovered, the colder she became. One night during dinner, she finally looked directly at him and said something that stayed in his mind for days. "Your sister spent years being emotionally destroyed so your father could protect this perfect family image." Declan stared silently at his plate. Vanessa's eyes filled with disappointment. "And you helped make it happen." Those words followed him everywhere afterward. At work, at home, even in his sleep. For most of his life, Declan believed success meant protecting the family legacy. But now the company was falling apart, his marriage was cracking, and the truth was impossible to escape. The Whitlock family had not been built on love. It had been built on sacrifice. And Maren had paid the price for all of it. As the problems inside Whitlock Construction grew worse, Declan felt his entire life slipping out of control. But nothing hurt him more than the silence from Maren. She ignored most of his calls now. When they did speak, her voice sounded distant and careful, like she no longer trusted him enough to speak freely. And honestly, she didn't. One cold evening, Declan drove across town to Maren's small apartment without warning. He sat outside in his car for several minutes staring at the building. Part of him wanted to leave. Another part knew he deserved whatever happened next. Finally, he walked upstairs and knocked softly on the door. A few seconds later, the door slowly opened. Little Elliot stood there holding a small toy dinosaur in his hand. The boy looked surprised to see him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elliot's face changed slightly. He looked nervous. Quietly, almost like he was scared of the answer, he asked, Are you going to make us leave again? Declan completely froze. The words hit harder than anything his father's letter said. Harder than the company problems. Harder than the collapsing marriage. Because for the first time in his life, Declan saw himself through a child's eyes. Not as the successful businessman everyone admired. Not as the trusted son. Not as the future owner of Whitlock Construction. But as the man who threw his own family into the cold after a funeral. A 6-year-old boy was standing in front of him, afraid of losing his home again. And Declan caused that fear. His throat tightened so badly, he could barely breathe. Before he could answer, Maren appeared behind Elliot and quietly pulled him closer. Her eyes met Declan's for only a second. There was no anger in them anymore. That somehow hurt even worse. There was only exhaustion. "We're fine," she said softly. "You should go home." Declan nodded slowly, unable to speak properly. Then he turned and walked away from the apartment feeling emptier than ever before. After that night, something inside him started breaking apart completely. At work, he struggled to focus during meetings. Important clients noticed his distraction. Employees whispered behind his back about the company's growing problems. At home, Vanessa became colder every day. Some nights, they barely spoke at all. Declan stopped sleeping normally. When he finally did sleep, he often woke up remembering Elliot's small voice at the door. "Are you going to make us leave again?" The guilt followed him everywhere now. Inside the office. Inside the house. Inside every quiet moment alone. And no matter how hard he tried, he could no longer escape the truth about the man he had become. A few weeks later, Maren received another call from the family attorney. This time, he asked to meet privately. She almost refused at first. Every conversation connected to her father seemed to uncover another painful truth. But something in the attorney's voice sounded serious. So one rainy afternoon, Maren drove to his office alone while Elliot stayed with Ruth after school. The attorney greeted her kindly and asked her to sit down. For a moment, he seemed unsure how to begin. Then he opened a thick folder filled with old notes, financial papers, and private letters connected to Grant Whitlock. "There's something your father wanted documented before his death," the attorney said quietly. Maren's stomach tightened. As the conversation continued, pieces of her childhood suddenly started making horrible sense. Years earlier, before becoming a single mother, Maren had secretly planned to leave Ohio. She wanted to move to another state, continue college, and build her own independent life far away from the pressure of the Whitlock family. She never told many people, but somehow her father found out. According to the attorney, Grant became terrified, not because he hated Maren, but because he feared losing control over the family completely. The attorney explained that Grant believed Declan would always stay loyal to the business. But Maren was different, independent, emotional, strong enough to leave. So instead of supporting her, Grant slowly started tearing down her confidence. He praised Declan constantly while criticizing Maren. He treated one child like the future and the other like a burden. Over time, the favoritism became normal inside the family. But it was never truly about love. It was about fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of losing control. Fear of watching his daughter build a life that no longer depended on him. Maren sat frozen in silence as tears slowly filled her eyes. The attorney continued carefully. "Your father carried enormous guilt before he died," he admitted. "He knew what he did to you emotionally." Maren looked down at her hands, unable to speak. All her life, she believed something was wrong with her. She thought she was weak. Not smart enough. Not successful enough. Not lovable enough. But now she realized something devastating. Her father intentionally made her feel that way. Not because she deserved it, but because he was afraid. The attorney handed her one final handwritten note from Grant. Inside, her father admitted he spent years destroying his daughter's confidence while pretending it was discipline. Maren finally broke down, crying right there in the office. Not because she missed her father, and not because she wanted forgiveness. She cried because for the first time in her entire life, she understood something that changed everything. None of the pain had ever been her fault. Whitlock Construction had survived lawsuits, market crashes, and difficult years before. But this time, the damage came from inside the family itself. The company officially entered financial crisis only months after Grant Whitlock's death. Without Marin's approval, major restructuring plans could not move forward legally. Meetings with lawyers became tense and chaotic. Important documents stayed unfinished for weeks. Declan tried to keep everything under control, but people inside the company could feel the panic growing. Employees started resigning quietly. Some had worked for the Whitlock family for over 20 years, but now they no longer trusted the leadership. Longtime business partners slowly walked away too. One investor canceled a major project after learning about the hidden ownership records connected to Marin. Another partner openly questioned whether the company had been built on lies from the beginning. Every week brought worse news. Declan spent most nights alone inside his office staring at financial reports that seemed impossible to fix. The pressure destroyed him emotionally. At home, things became even colder. Vanessa barely looked at him anymore. Their conversations became short and painful. One evening, after another stressful meeting, Declan walked into the kitchen and found Vanessa quietly packing a suitcase. He froze immediately. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. Vanessa zipped the bag shut without looking at him. "I need some time away from this house," she said. Declan looked heartbroken. "Vanessa." Finally, she turned toward him with tears in her eyes. "You spent your whole life protecting your father's approval," she said quietly. "And look what it turned you into." The words cut deeper than she probably realized, because Declan already hated the answer. A few weeks later, Vanessa officially moved out temporarily. Now the huge Whitlock family house felt empty and lifeless. The silence inside it became unbearable. At night, Declan wandered from room to room, unable to sleep. Every corner of the house carried painful memories now. He remembered ignored phone calls from Marin when she needed support. Family dinners where she sat quietly while everyone praised him instead. Cruel jokes he laughed at because he wanted his father's approval. Moments when he could have defended his sister but stayed silent instead. Again and again, those memories replayed inside his mind like punishment. For most of his life, Declan believed success meant becoming the son his father wanted. Powerful, respected, important. But now the company was collapsing, his marriage was falling apart, and the family he tried so hard to protect no longer existed. And for the first time in his entire life, all the money, status, and success felt completely meaningless. Because none of it could erase what he had done to Marin. Months passed, and little by little, Marin Whitlock stopped looking like the broken woman who once cried alone inside a freezing car. Her life was still not perfect. She still carried painful memories. But for the first time in years, those memories no longer controlled her. The settlement connected to Whitlock Construction was finally completed after months of legal problems. Marin received her rightful portion quietly, without celebration. Instead of wasting the money, she used it carefully. She started a small renovation business focused on affordable family housing. Marin wanted to help struggling families find safe homes without impossible prices. People were surprised by how quickly the business began growing. Unlike her father, Marin treated employees kindly. She listened to workers, respected clients, and stayed personally involved in every project. Soon, local families started recommending her company to others. For the first time in her life, people respected Marin because of who she truly was. Not because of the Whitlock family name. Not because of Grant Whitlock's opinion. And definitely not because of Declan's approval. Meanwhile, Elliot flourished in their new life. He made friends at school, laughed constantly, and finally looked like a child free from fear. One afternoon, while helping paint a small kitchen inside a renovated home, Marin suddenly realized something strange. She felt peaceful. Not rich. Not powerful. Just peaceful. And after everything she survived, that feeling meant more to her than money ever could. Across town, Declan quietly watched all of it from a distance. Sometimes he drove past one of Marin's renovation projects without stopping. Other times he heard people praising her work during business meetings. Every compliment felt bittersweet. Because the more he saw his sister succeed, the more he understood how wrong the family had been about her. Maren never destroyed the Whitlock family. She carried it for years while everyone else ignored her sacrifices. She protected people quietly, worked hard quietly, suffered quietly, and somehow, after all the pain they caused her, she still became stronger instead of bitter. That truth haunted Declan constantly. One evening, he sat alone in his empty house looking through old family photographs. In almost every picture, he stood proudly beside their father while Maren stayed somewhere in the background, smiling politely, trying to belong. Declan stared at those photos for a long time before finally understanding something painful. His sister had always been the strongest person in the family. Not him, not their father. Maren. Everyone had simply been too blind to see it while they still had the chance. Nearly a year after the night he threw his sister out, Declan Whitlock stood outside Maren's new home holding nothing in his hands. No legal papers. No business contracts. No excuses prepared in advance. Just regret. For several seconds, he stared at the front door, trying to find the courage to knock. The house looked small compared to the huge Whitlock family home, but somehow it felt warmer. Safer. Inside, he could hear Elliot laughing. That sound alone almost made him leave. Finally, Declan knocked softly. Maren opened the door a few moments later. She looked surprised to see him, but not angry. Just calm. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she stepped aside quietly and allowed him inside. The house smelled like fresh paint and dinner cooking in the kitchen. Family photos decorated the walls. Elliot's school drawings covered the refrigerator. It did not look expensive, but it looked happy. Declan realized he had not felt real peace in a very long time. Elliot walked into the room carrying a toy truck. When he saw Declan, he hesitated slightly before sitting beside his mother. That small reaction broke something inside Declan all over again. They sat together in silence for several moments before Declan finally spoke. "I still hate myself for that night," he admitted quietly. Maren listened without interrupting. Declan looked down at his shaking hands. "Sometimes Elliot still gets nervous when people talk about losing homes," he continued. "Vanessa told me he asked once if you would ever make him sleep in the car again." Maren closed her eyes briefly after hearing that. The guilt inside Declan became unbearable. "I became exactly like Dad," he whispered. For the first time since childhood, tears filled his eyes. "I thought I was protecting the family," he said brokenly. "But I destroyed it." Maren stayed silent for a long moment. Then she finally looked directly at him and said something he would remember forever. "Dad ruined this family long before he died," she said softly. "But you chose to continue it." Declan completely broke down. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just years of guilt, pride, pain, and regret finally collapsing at once. Maren watched quietly, but neither of them pretended everything could be fixed. Some wounds heal slowly. Others never fully disappear. Eventually, Declan stood up to leave. Before walking out, he looked around the small house one last time. For the first time in his life, he understood what real strength looked like. It was not power. It was not control. It was survival with kindness still left inside you. As Declan walked away, Maren gently closed the door behind him while Elliot laughed somewhere inside the house. And for the first time in her entire life, Maren finally felt safe.